He mocked his wife while signing the divorce, not knowing she was a secret trillionaire heiress. The courtroom was cold. Not the kind of cold that comes from air conditioning or open windows. The kind of cold that settles into a room when something irreversible is about to happen. The kind of cold that creeps into your chest when you realize you are watching a man destroy the best thing that ever happened to him, and he does not even know it yet. Marcus Hale sat at the left side of the long mahogany table. His charcoal suit was pressed. His cufflinks caught the light. His posture said everything his words had not yet spoken. He believed he had already won. Across from him sat a woman in a simple ivory blouse and cream-colored trousers. No jewelry, no heels, no expression of panic or desperation. She sat with her hands folded in her lap like someone waiting for a train she had already decided to board. Her name was Vivian. Marcus grabbed the pen without hesitation. He signed the divorce papers with the same confident stroke he used to close million-dollar deals. Fast, decisive, final. Then he slid the documents across the polished table toward his wife, and he leaned forward just enough for the entire courtroom to hear what came next. Well, best of luck paying rent, Vivi. A few people in the gallery shifted in their seats. Someone cleared their throat. The judge looked up briefly, then returned to her paperwork. Marcus smirked. He thought the moment belonged to him. He had no idea. Now let me pause right here, because I need you to understand something before we go any further. That man, that confident, smirking, self-satisfied man who just mocked his wife in open court, he called her broke. He called her ordinary. He laughed at the life she lived. And in just a few minutes from now, the doors of this courtroom are going to open. And what walks through those doors is going to turn his entire world upside down. Because the woman he just humiliated, the woman he assumed had nothing, she is worth more than every person in that building combined. Times 1,000. Have you ever been underestimated? Have you ever had someone look right through you because they thought you had nothing to offer? Have you ever been judged not by who you are, but by what someone assumed you were worth? This is the story of a man who measured everyone by their bank account, and the woman who let him believe she had nothing because she wanted to see if he would love her anyway. He did not. But what happens when the truth comes out? What happens when the courtroom doors open and everything he thought he knew collapses? Stay with me, because what happens next will leave you absolutely speechless. And before we go any further, if you love stories that hit different, stories with twists you never see coming, stories that stay with you long after they end, go ahead and hit that subscribe button right now. Trust me, you do not want to miss what is coming. But to understand how we got here, we need to go back. Back to the very beginning. Back to a quiet little coastal town most people have never heard of. Back to a flower shop with a hand-painted sign and a woman who smelled like lavender. And back to the moment Marcus Hale made the biggest mistake of his life and did not even know it. The town was called Harrogate. It sat along a stretch of coastline that tourists rarely visited and developers had long forgotten. The buildings were old. The awnings were sun-faded. The sidewalks had cracks where wildflowers pushed through in the spring, as if the earth itself was trying to remind everyone that beauty does not need permission to exist. Marcus had never planned to stop there. His car, a sleek black Audi that looked almost offensive against the peeling paint and rusted mailboxes of the town, had overheated on the coastal road. The mechanic 2 blocks from Main Street told him it would take a couple of hours. Marcus was irritated. He checked his watch. He loosened his tie. And then he wandered. He passed a laundromat, a bakery with a crooked open sign, and then he saw it. A small storefront wedged between the two, with a wooden sign above the door that read, "Bloom and Root." He walked in the way a man walks into a place he has already decided is beneath him. His eyes swept the room. The shelves were mismatched. The floor was worn wood. The pots were clay, not ceramic. Everything was simple. Everything was lived in. And then he saw her. She was standing behind a wooden counter dusted with pollen. Her hair was pulled into a loose braid, dark strands falling around her temples like they had escaped on purpose. Her apron was smudged with soil. Her shoes were canvas, soft and faded from years of use. She was arranging white peonies in a glass vase, placing each stem with a kind of reverence that made it look less like work and more like worship. She looked up. "Can I help you?" Her voice was unhurried, gentle, like warm water over smooth stone. Marcus felt something shift in his chest. Not love, not yet, Something more like recognition, or maybe it was just appetite dressed up in better clothes. "Just looking," he said, but he was not looking at the flowers. Now here is the thing about Marcus Hale that you need to understand. Marcus did not fall in love with Vivian that day. He fell in love with what he assumed she was. He saw the canvas shoes and thought, she is humble. He saw the soil-stained apron and thought, she is simple. He saw the flower shop in a forgotten town and thought, she will never outshine me. She will never challenge me. She will never be more than I am. He did not see a woman. He saw a mirror that made his reflection look taller. And that is the most dangerous kind of attraction there is. Over the next 3 weeks, Marcus found excuses to return. A meeting nearby, he told his assistant. Scouting property along the coast, he told his partners at Hale & Crow Development. The firm he had built from a small rented office into one of the fastest growing real estate companies on the eastern seaboard. Each time he visited, they talked a little longer. Vivian told him about the language of flowers, how marigolds carried grief in their petals, how lavender whispered devotion, how sunflowers always turned toward the light no matter how dark the sky had been the night before. Marcus nodded as if he understood, but inside he was cataloging her simplicity like a man checking boxes on a list. Beautiful. Check. Quiet. Check. Unassuming. Check. Someone who would admire his success. Check. He never once asked where she came from. Now I need to tell you something that Marcus never knew. Something that changes every single moment of this story from this point forward. Vivian Duval was not who he thought she was. Her full name was Vivian Margot Duval, and she was the sole living granddaughter of Henri Duval. If that name does not mean anything to you yet, let me explain. Henri Duval was the founder of the Duval Consortium, not a company. A constellation, luxury fashion houses that dressed royalty, biotech firms that held patents worth billions, shipping routes that moved goods across every ocean on the planet, telecommunications networks, vineyards stretching across 3 continents, an empire built from a single textile factory in Lyon, France, over 6 decades of relentless visionary work. The current estimated value of the Duval estate was approximately $1.4 trillion. Trillion, with a T, and Vivian was the primary heir to all of it. But here is where the story takes a turn you might not expect. Because Vivian did not grow up in marble hallways or private jets. She did not attend elite academies or debutante balls. She did not learn to measure people by the weight of their wallets. And the reason for that was heartbreak. Henri Duval had one son, Vivian's father, and that son had been everything Henri feared wealth could create. Reckless, excessive, untethered from anything real. He lived fast and loud and burned through every second of his life as if the money would somehow protect him from consequence. It did not. He died young, tragically, senselessly, consumed by a lifestyle that had no floor beneath it. Henri buried his only child in a private cemetery in Provence. He stood over that grave for 3 days, and when he finally walked away, he was not the same man. The empire he had built could buy almost anything in the world, but it could not buy back his son. And standing in that cemetery, with the wind pulling at his coat and the silence pressing against his chest, Henri Duval made a vow. The same poison would never touch Vivian. He raised her himself, far from the towers and the boardrooms and the flashing cameras. She attended public school. She learned to cook, to garden, to sit with strangers and listen without checking her phone. She volunteered at crisis shelters, read to the elderly at care homes, and worked part-time jobs, not because she had to, but because Henri believed that purpose was the only antidote to privilege. He told her something once that she carried with her every single day of her life. The world will try to define you by what you have. Let it define you by what you give. Vivian believed that, completely, down to her bones. So when Marcus walked into her flower shop with his tailored suit and his expensive watch and his confident smile, she did not see a businessman. She did not see a bank account. She saw something behind his eyes that made her believe there was more to him than the surface. It happened during their 4th conversation. Marcus mentioned his mother. She had passed away when he was 17, and when he spoke about her, something changed in his voice. It cracked, just slightly, just enough, like a door opening onto a room he did not usually let anyone see. That crack in his voice, that is what Vivian fell in love with. Not the suit, not the car, not the ambition, the vulnerability. She thought it was the real Marcus. She thought the rest was just armor. She said yes to dinner that night. She said yes to a second date the following week. And 7 months later, she said yes on a hilltop overlooking the ocean, with wildflowers in her hair and tears on her cheeks, and a heart so full she thought it might burst. They married on that same hilltop. The ceremony was small. Vivian had insisted. Wildflowers instead of roses. A local string duo instead of an orchestra. Handwritten vows instead of rehearsed speeches. Marcus had agreed, though privately he found it embarrassingly modest. He told his business partner afterward that it was charmingly simple, as if simplicity were something to be tolerated rather than treasured. But the first year of their marriage was tender, genuinely tender. Marcus came home to dinners that smelled like rosemary and garlic. Vivian greeted him with a warmth that never felt performed. He kissed her forehead when she walked through the door, smelling of earth and chrysanthemums. He told colleagues at work that she keeps me grounded, and for a while, he seemed to mean it. He even joined her once at the community garden where she taught neighborhood children how to plant sunflowers. She handed him a small pot and a packet of seeds, and he fumbled through it with dirt under his fingernails and a confused expression that made the children laugh. Vivian placed a sunflower behind his ear and smiled at him, and he smiled back. It was real. That smile, that moment, that afternoon in the garden with soil on his hands and a flower behind his ear and his wife laughing beside him. It was the last purely happy moment they ever shared, because success has a way of changing people, and Marcus was no exception. Hale and Crow development expanded rapidly. New towers, new investors, new magazine profiles. Marcus's name started appearing in industry lists and business journals. He was invited to galas and private dinners with people whose net worth had more zeros than most people could count. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the man Vivian married began to disappear. Change rarely arrives like a storm. It creeps in like frost, slow and silent, until everything it touches turns brittle. It started with small comments. "You are still at that little shop," he said one evening, loosening his tie after a gala he had attended alone. "Do you not think it is time to do something more?" Vivian looked up from the book she was reading. "More than what? More than arranging flowers for strangers, Vivi. My partner's wives run foundations. They sit on boards. You could at least try." "I like what I do," she said quietly. Marcus exhaled through his nose. Sharp, dismissive. A sound Vivian would come to know well. A sound that said, "You are not enough." The arguments did not explode. They accumulated, like stones dropped one by one into a jar until the glass could no longer hold the weight. A sigh when she wore flats to a dinner instead of heels. A cutting remark when she mentioned volunteering at the shelter. A long, punishing silence when she declined to attend yet another networking event, filled with people who smiled with their mouths but never with their eyes. Each wound was small on its own, but together they formed a wall, and Marcus kept building it higher. He wanted a wife who sparkled in boardrooms, someone glamorous, someone polished, someone whose presence next to him signaled power and status and arrival. He wanted performance. He wanted spectacle. Vivian refused to pretend. She continued tending her flowers. She continued visiting the elderly. She continued cooking meals for neighbors who were grieving or ill. She moved through the world exactly as she always had, with quiet kindness and open hands, and it drove Marcus mad, because he could not understand why she would not become the woman he wanted her to be. He never considered that she was already more than he deserved. One night she came home late. She had spent the evening helping a single mother move into a new apartment, carrying boxes, assembling furniture, making sure the woman's children had beds to sleep in. Marcus was waiting in the kitchen. His arms were crossed. His jaw was tight. "You act like we are living in some fairy tale," he said. "Wake up, Vivienne. The world does not reward kindness. It rewards power." Vivian set her bag down slowly. She looked at him, not with anger, not with frustration, with something far worse, disappointment. "If you really believe that," she said softly, "then I feel sorry for you." Marcus laughed, but the sound was hollow, empty, and they both heard it. That hollow laugh echoed through the house long after the lights went off. It was the sound of a man who had stopped being the person his wife once believed in. Now, if this story is hitting you in the chest right now, if you know someone who needs to hear this, drop a like and share it with them, because what Marcus does next is going to change everything. And what Vivian reveals. That is going to change him. The breaking point came on a Saturday night. Marcus's company was celebrating its 5th anniversary, and he had planned the kind of event designed to make people feel small in comparison. A rooftop venue in the city, crystal chandeliers casting fractured light across 100 powerful faces, champagne towers, a jazz quartet, every surface gleaming. Vivian had come reluctantly. She wore a navy blue dress she had owned for years. It was elegant in its simplicity, the kind of dress that did not scream for attention but earned it quietly. But Marcus had wanted glamour. He had wanted spectacle. He had wanted the kind of wife who made other men jealous. What he got was Vivian. She moved through the crowd with natural grace, speaking to everyone the same way, whether they were the CEO of a Fortune 500 company or the waiter refilling water glasses. She asked people about their children. She remembered names from previous events. She made people feel seen. And none of that mattered to Marcus. Halfway through the evening, one of his investors, a man with silver cufflinks and a smile that never reached his eyes, turned to Vivian and asked what she did. "I run a small flower shop," she said, smiling warmly, "and I volunteer at a community center on weekends." The investor nodded politely and moved on, but Marcus, standing just within earshot, felt his jaw tighten. His face flushed. His fingers curled around his champagne glass so tightly the crystal could have cracked. He waited until Vivian stepped onto the terrace. Then he followed. The city spread out below them. A million lights blinking against the dark. The wind carried the faint sound of music from inside. And between them, a silence that had been building for months. "Do you have any idea how that sounds?" he said. His voice was low but sharp, like a blade wrapped in silk. "A flower shop. A volunteer. My investors think I married a—" He stopped himself, but the word he swallowed hung in the air between them like smoke. He did not need to say it. She heard it anyway. There are words that do not need to be spoken to cause damage. Sometimes the silence between them cuts deeper than anything language could carry. "A what, Marcus?" Vivian's voice was steady, quiet, unflinching. He said nothing. She looked at him for a long moment. Her eyes glistened, catching the city light like wet glass. But no tears fell. She had learned, somewhere along the way, to hold her pain like water in cupped hands, carefully, quietly, without spilling. "You do not see me, Marcus," she whispered. "You never did." She turned and walked back through the gala, past the chandeliers, past the champagne, past the 100 faces that did not notice the quiet devastation of a woman walking away from a man who never deserved her. She left the party alone. Marcus did not follow, and that was the night the marriage ended, not on paper. Paper came later. It ended on that terrace, under a sky full of stars, when a woman finally stopped waiting for a man to see what had been standing in front of him all along. 6 weeks later, Marcus filed for divorce. He sat in his leather office chair, legs crossed, speaking to his attorneys with the casual ease of a man discussing a lunch order. "She has no assets," he said. "No investments. No family money. She works at a flower shop, for God's sake. This should be simple." His lead attorney, a sharp woman named Adeline Marsh, looked up from her notepad. "And the prenup?" Marcus waved his hand dismissively. "There was not one. I did not think I needed one. She had nothing to protect." Adeline made a note but said nothing, though if you looked closely, you might have seen something flicker behind her eyes. Something cautious. Let that sink in. He did not protect his assets because he assumed she had none. He never once considered that the opposite might be true. That weekend, Marcus met his friends for whiskey at a private lounge downtown. They sat in leather chairs and laughed about things that were not funny. "She will probably ask for half of everything," Marcus said, swirling his glass. "Let her try. She will be lucky to walk away with the apartment deposit." They laughed. Every single one of them. And not one of them knew they were laughing at a woman who could buy and sell every person at that table without blinking. Not one of them knew they were mocking a name that moved markets. Not one of them had any idea what was coming. The morning of the hearing arrived under a pale gray sky. Marcus dressed in his sharpest charcoal suit. He chose a tie that cost more than most people's monthly rent. He looked in the mirror and saw exactly what he wanted to see. A winner. He arrived at the courthouse early, briefcase in hand, shoulders back, the walk of a man who had already written the ending. Vivian arrived alone, simple ivory blouse, cream trousers, no jewelry, No heels. Her hair was down, falling over her shoulders like dark silk. She carried nothing but herself. She looked calm, serene, almost peaceful, as if she had already made peace with something Marcus had not yet begun to understand. He leaned toward her as they took their places at opposite ends of the table. "Ready to start over?" he murmured. The ghost of a smirk pulled at the corner of his mouth. Vivian did not respond. She folded her hands in her lap, and she waited. She did not look like a woman about to lose everything. She looked like a woman who had already found her freedom. Marcus should have noticed that. But Marcus only ever saw what he wanted to see. "All right, we are about to enter the courtroom, and I am telling you right now, what happens next is something Marcus Hale never saw coming, not in a million years. If you have not subscribed yet, do it now, because this moment right here, this is the moment everything flips." The judge, an older woman with reading glasses perched on the bridge of her nose, began reviewing the preliminary documents. Marcus's legal team presented their case efficiently. Division of assets, property claims, financial disclosures. Everything was clean, organized, predictable. Marcus grabbed the pen. He signed the divorce papers with a flourish. Fast, decisive, the same way he signed every contract, every deal, every transaction. To him, this was just another closing. He slid the documents across the polished table toward Vivian. "Well," he said, loud enough for the entire room to hear. "Best of luck paying rent, Vivi." Several people in the gallery shifted uncomfortably. Adeline Marsh closed her eyes briefly. A flicker of something crossed her face. Not quite embarrassment, something closer to dread. Vivian picked up the pen. Her hand was steady. Her breathing was even. She signed her name in elegant, unhurried script. Vivian Margot Duval. She set the pen down gently, as if placing a flower in a vase. The judge reached for the documents to finalize. And then the courtroom doors opened. The sound cut through the silence like a crack of thunder in a still sky. Every head turned. 3 figures entered. The first 2 were attorneys, tall, composed, immaculate. They wore suits that did not come off a rack, suits that whispered of international law firms and retainers most people could not fathom. They moved with the quiet precision of people who were accustomed to rooms that went silent when they entered. Between them walked an elderly man. He was lean, silver-haired. His posture carried decades of quiet authority, the kind that does not need to announce itself. His eyes were sharp, but not unkind. He walked slowly, deliberately, as though the world had long ago learned to wait for him. The courtroom fell completely silent. Marcus frowned. "Who the hell are they?" he whispered. Vivian looked up, and for the first time that morning something soft flickered across her face. A warmth, a recognition, the quiet relief of someone who has been standing alone for a very long time and finally sees a familiar hand reaching out. "My legal team," she said gently. Marcus blinked. "Your what?" One of the attorneys stepped forward. He placed 4 leather-bound folders on the table. Each one was thick, meticulous, stamped with a crest Marcus did not recognize. The kind of crest that does not appear on business cards but on trust documents and international filings, and the kind of paperwork that moves governments. "Your Honor," the attorney said. His voice was measured, precise, the kind of calm that only comes from representing a force that does not need to raise its voice. "We represent Ms. Vivian Margot Duval, primary heir and majority beneficiary of the Duval Consortium." The judge's eyebrows rose above her glasses. Marcus let out a short laugh, nervous, involuntary, the kind of laugh that escapes when the brain has not yet caught up with what the ears just heard. "I am sorry. The what?" the attorney continued without pause. "The Duval Consortium is a multinational holding entity encompassing luxury goods, biotechnology, global logistics, and telecommunications. Ms. Duval is the sole living heir to the estate of Mr. Henri Duval, the consortium's founder. The current estimated valuation of the estate is approximately $1.4 trillion. The courtroom gasped. Not a polite intake of breath, a gasp, the kind that comes from the gut, the kind that ripples across a room like a stone dropped into still water. Marcus's smile collapsed. It did not fade. It collapsed, like a building whose foundation had just been pulled out from under it. His face drained of color. His hands, which moments ago had signed those papers with such arrogance, began to tremble against the table. He stared at Vivian. He stared at her like he was seeing her for the very first time. $1.4 trillion. The woman he had called ordinary. The woman he told to worry about rent. The woman whose flower shop he had mocked in front of friends. The woman he had tried to make feel small at every dinner, every gala, every argument in their kitchen. She was worth more than his wildest imagination could compute. More than his company. More than his industry. More than everything he had ever touched or dreamed of touching. That is not. He could not finish a sentence. His mouth moved, but his brain had shut down. The elderly man stepped forward. Henri Duval. He placed a weathered hand on Vivian's shoulder and looked at Marcus. Not with anger. Not with contempt. With something far more devastating. Clarity. I raised Vivian to find someone who would love her for who she was, Henri said. His voice was quiet, but it filled the room. Not for the name she carries. Not for the fortune behind it. Just her. He paused. His eyes did not waver. You had that chance, young man. Marcus's hands trembled. His lips parted, but nothing came out. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a breath. You never told me. Vivian met his gaze, and in her eyes there was no triumph, no satisfaction, no revenge, just sadness, the deep, aching kind that comes not from losing something, but from realizing it was never truly found. You never asked, Marcus. Not once. 4 words. That is all it took. 4 words to dismantle everything Marcus Hale believed about himself. You never asked. He never asked where she came from. He never asked about her family. He never asked what she dreamed about at night. He never asked what made her afraid or what made her feel alive or what her grandfather's name was. He was so busy measuring her against his own reflection that he forgot to look at who she actually was. The judge adjusted her glasses. She reviewed the supplemental filings for a long, waited moment. Then she spoke. Mr. Hale, according to the asset protection instruments and prenuptial filings submitted by Ms. Duval's counsel prior to the marriage, all Duval family assets are classified as separate property. They are not subject to division. Marcus felt his stomach drop through the floor. But it was not about the money. Not really. It was worse than that. It was the sudden, brutal, suffocating understanding of what those words meant. Vivian had never wanted his money. She had never needed it. Not a single cent. She had never measured him by his portfolio or his towers or his magazine covers. She had loved him. Genuinely. Wholly. Freely. She had loved the man she thought she saw in that flower shop. The man who spoke about his mother with a crack in his voice. The man she believed was hiding something tender beneath all that ambition. And he had repaid her with contempt. He had mocked her kindness, belittled her purpose, dismissed her warmth as weakness, tried to turn her into someone she was never meant to be. And all along, the woman he called ordinary was extraordinary in ways he never possessed the depth to recognize. Vivian stood. She gathered nothing from the table. Not a folder, not a document, not a single piece of paper. She turned toward the door, her grandfather's arm linked gently through hers. At the threshold, she paused. She did not look back, but she spoke, softly, almost to herself, though every soul in that silent courtroom heard her. I hope you find what you are looking for, Marcus. I truly do. The door closed behind her. She did not slam it. She did not gloat. She did not cry. She simply walked out of that courtroom the same way she had walked through her entire marriage. With grace, with dignity, and with a heart that refused to become bitter. Marcus sat in the courtroom for a long time after everyone left. The fluorescent lights hummed above him. The chairs emptied one by one. His attorneys packed their briefcases and exchanged uneasy glances before excusing themselves. Even Adeline Marsh, who had seen 1,000 divorces, paused at the door and looked back at him. She said nothing. What could she say? Marcus did not move. He sat with the weight of everything he had thrown away pressing down on his chest like stone. Not the money. He did not mourn the trillion-dollar name or the empire behind it. He mourned the woman who arranged peonies like prayers, who read stories to strangers in care homes, who cooked meals for grieving neighbors, who whispered kindness is never nothing and meant it with every fiber of her being. He had held something rare in his hands, something most people spend their entire lives searching for. And he had crushed it, not because he did not have it, but because he did not recognize its worth. For the first time in his life, Marcus Hale understood what it meant to be truly poor. Not in his bank account, in his soul. He looked down at the divorce papers. His signature stared back at him. Bold, confident, careless. It looked like an accusation written in his own hand. He sat there until the bailiff told him the building was closing, and when he finally stood, his legs felt like they belonged to someone else. He walked out of the courthouse into the gray evening air and stood on the steps and looked at the city around him. The towers, the traffic, the noise, all of it felt hollow. Vivian drove back to Harrogate that evening. The coast road was empty. The sky was streaked with amber and violet, the kind of sunset that looks like the world is putting on its most beautiful dress before it says goodnight. The windows were down. The salt air moved through the car like a living thing. She parked behind Bloom and Root. The shop was dark. She unlocked the back door and stepped inside. The smell hit her first. Lavender and damp earth. The smell of every morning she had spent in this place. The smell of peace. She stood in the quiet for a long time. Her fingers brushed the petals of a white peony sitting on the counter. The same kind of flower she'd been arranging the first time Marcus walked through her door. And then the tears came. Not a dramatic collapse, not a scream. Just a slow, shaking exhale that turned into something deeper. Tears that had been held behind still eyes for months, maybe years. She did not cry for Marcus. She cried for the version of him she had believed in. For the man with the cracked voice and the shy smile in the garden. For the love she had offered freely and watched be discarded like something disposable. For the years she had spent making herself small so someone else could feel tall. But even as she wept, something else stirred within her. Something fragile but unmistakable, like the first green shoot breaking through frozen soil after a long and brutal winter. Relief. She was free, not because of the fortune waiting in trust documents and legal vaults, not because of the name Duval or the empire it carried. She had never needed any of that to know who she was. She was free because she had walked through the fire of being unseen and come out the other side still knowing exactly who she was, still knowing that kindness was not weakness, still knowing that the way she loved was not too much or too soft or too quiet. It was enough. It had always been enough. The right person simply had not been there to receive it. Vivian wiped her eyes. She straightened her shoulders. She reached for the watering can on the shelf and began tending to the flowers that had waited patiently for her return. She had work to do. And tomorrow, as always, she would begin again. Some people spend their whole lives building empires and never once stop to notice the extraordinary souls standing quietly beside them. Marcus Hale learned too late that the richest person in the room had never been the one with the loudest voice. It was the one with the gentlest hands, the one who loved without condition, the one who never needed a single thing he had to offer, except his heart. And that was the one thing he never thought to give. Never judge someone by their appearance. Never measure someone by the car they drive, or the job they work, or the clothes they wear. Because the person you overlook today might be the person you spend the rest of your life wishing you had seen. And the kindness you dismiss as weakness might be the most powerful thing in the room. Love does not ask for your resume. It asks for your presence. And if you cannot give that, no amount of success will ever fill the space it leaves behind. If this story moved you, if it made you think about how you treat the people who love you, I need you to do something right now. Hit that like button. Leave a comment telling me what would you have done in Vivian's place. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message today. And if you have not already, subscribe to Infinite Love Tales by Mr. White and turn on that notification bell. Because every week I bring you stories like this. Stories that remind us what truly matters. Stories that stay with you long after the screen goes dark. I will see you in the next one. And remember, the one thing he never thought to give was the only thing she ever wanted, his heart.